So I'm pondering the impact of dialysis on me and my husband Randy and on the family. It's sort of all encompassing. That was a significant part of our lives for 2 years. So the theme of our lives, both pre and during and post dialysis, seems to be take nothing for granted. So something as basic as peeing became really the marker for Randy's state of wellness. And not everything gets addressed. You know, some things you keep to yourself, and it wasn't until after the transplant that I saw, or that Randy had said that his urine output, which I knew was very low, was actually 0. And I was stunned. Anyway, so I would say some of the things that, as far as us not taking for granted, was life, because he was shot in the first year of our marriage, and lucky to be surviving that. His health. He went into the RCMP having been thoroughly assessed for physical, emotional, psychological health, etc., and passed all that. And then here he was with questionable survival, and then minor limp to his leg, recovery from significant surgery, a couple of feet of intestine taken out because of the gunshot damage, and had about 9 years of feeling extremely low energy. And one of the gauges I had that impacted that we were on a roll age-wise and friend-wise, going to lots of weddings, and Randy just loved to dance. So during those 9 years of him being really a closed toxic waste system with the kidneys not okay, so we went to a lot of weddings, and then during failing kidney years, he really couldn't make it through more than one dance, which was very debilitating to his self-image as well as his having a good time. So other things, take nothing for granted, the ability to, the sense of fun, the sense of energy, the positive self-image, the sense of being worthy of living as a result of someone else dying, worthy, well, that was later, worthy of the gift of the grieving family. So in the RCMP, in his first year of working in the RCMP, he was highly noticed and valued, and I think his career was on a fast track. And then when he was shot, it certainly, though I would have loved if he had quit, I knew that wasn't going to be on his radar. So he was keen to get back into the RCMP and get back to get rid of those bad guys. So in the years that he'd been shot, but he's back to work, and he just wasn't feeling good. And when we were up in Inuvik, which was part of his dream, being in the RCMP versus any other local force, because it was going to the north and the remote places, it was his dream. So we did get up to the Arctic, but he really didn't enjoy that year because he wasn't well. And when he said to the doctor, I feel like when I was in university and had mono, like I'm really wiped. And they just basically sloughed it off and said, oh, everybody's tired up here. It's dark and everybody's tired. So it was not followed up by them or by him. So there he was in his supposed dream place and being afraid of approaching cars, because that's how he ended up being shot beforehand. His self-image didn't allow to say that he wasn't having a good time, of course, so he just toughed it out. And it was during our time there that he was diagnosed with kidney disease. So obviously that's not the place to be, in the remote zone, so we could go south, we could go anywhere actually in Canada. And he toyed with BC, but he was really concerned that he would end up being medically discharged, which the RCMP never said, but other forces did say that to him, oh, if you were in ours, you'd have been kicked right out. So, though he didn't verbalize that to me for a long time, that was an overriding fear that he better go back to where family is, because who knows what kind of support we would need, and they wouldn't pay for us necessarily to go back from another part of the country. So he had a very much a sense of being a failure, coming home with his tail between his legs, going back to family, feeling he was disappointing others as well as himself. So, because the kidneys do a large part of the clearing of the waste and them not functioning, when we moved back here, we'd taken a month to drive across the country to get here because we allowed so much mileage per day. So we visited people and we drove and we took our sweet time, and then got here to find he had a large clot in the renal vein, which could have been life-threatening. And they tried hard, including snake venom, to dissolve it, and it never was totally dissolved. So maybe that's why he didn't bleed to death. Maybe he had an issue with clotting that we didn't know about, though I highly doubt it with all the blood work that was done to get into the RCMP. And maybe that was divine intervention, that he wasn't allowed to die, which actually he did think when he was shot here, first shot, and he just knew, he was told, something told him to turn his head, which prevented the bullet from going here, and it just sort of skirted by there. And so anyway, so he came back, he had that attempt to be dissolved, continued at home working. He was only awake about 9 hours a day for years because he just was so toxic. He was getting irritable. There was never any doubt that he still had a job in the RCMP mind. They just said, come in as much as you can come in. So if that meant half a day or if that meant full day, that was very good of them. Lots of people said he should have been given full pension right then for having had it happen on the job, but that's not something he would have done. So eventually, so we arrived here with, I think it was 15% kidney function, and though that made him feel really crappy, that wasn't bad enough for them to consider dialysis. So dialysis was sort of in his mind the worst possible scenario. Maybe not worst, but he dreaded that because it meant very much confined to base and 3 times a week, and all very medical and time consuming, and the fear of the unknown as well. So it turned out that when he was given the option, it meant driving an hour to Toronto General. So I had a 1-year-old at the time and a 5 turning 6-year-old, and so it took 4 hours actually on the machine and the hours driving there and back, usually the 3rd shift of the day on the machines, which meant that he would be finished about 11 or 11:30 at night and then come home. Though his blood was being purified, it was a tiring process, so he was usually ready to crash when he came home. So it did get to the point, though, that he looked forward to dialysis because he knew it made him feel better with the cleaner blood. And that first summer, so we had it in April. No, in April. In the first summer, the 6-year-old had soccer during the week, so she had 2 nights of soccer. So it was either, it was dialysis, soccer, dialysis, soccer, dialysis, weekend off. So it was very structured agenda, and it meant also that we couldn't go very far away until we heard about, actually the other interesting thing was he had his transplant in April. We were able to go to the transplant games that were at the nearby university, York, also in April. So he got to see all kinds of different organs. We got very focused on kidney, of course, and there was people with liver transplants or waiting for, saying, you're so lucky because if the kidney doesn't work, you can have dialysis, whereas if the liver doesn't work and you don't get a donor, you don't have an alternative, you just die. And there were stories of that. So it was an exciting time for the kids to be involved with, they had activities for the kids, races and stuff. But meeting different people, a heart transplant, and here's a guy in a running and marathon goal. So that was good, and then we found out about the Camp Dorset dialysis camp, which meant we could go for a week as a family in a bungalow type thing. But being from camp, we thought the word Camp Dorset would make it more like a camp environment, but it was very much not like that. It meant he could be on dialysis there, but it also meant the patients, fellow patients, were not really looking to socialize. But it meant we could get away, and he subsequently used that dialysis option when he was taking scouts to camp and paddled across a lake and drove to get to the dialysis center so he could do that and still be up at the participating in the camp, the scout camp. Also did that once for to be able to be at a relative's cottage for a week. So that was a big bonus. Fortunately for us, we were given the option, probably because we were young and on the ball, and maybe because we were a little bit of a distance away, we were given the option for a 6-week training process at Toronto General.
You're a nurse.
What?
And because you're a nurse.
Maybe the fact that I was a nurse, so a public health nurse hardly does anything about, doesn't train me anything about dialysis. And so that was a 6-week process, and the kids were brought down to be looked after, I guess just you. Anyway, so it was pretty intense, and luckily for us, everything that could go wrong at some point, we got to have go wrong while we were in training, so that made it easier. Well, it's good to learn all the potential disasters under the wing of somebody else. Sometimes their fault, sometimes we had said, you know, like, isn't that too much fluid to be taking off in one day? And oh no, it's fine. And then of course it was, and then you have to rewind it and give back some fluid. So it was good confidence building, though I was always grateful that Randy was as much paying attention as I was. But we did it one evening, we went more like started at 1 at night, which was really stupid. I mean, but we finished at 1 anyway. We were both exhausted and ended up, it wasn't good. We had to rewind the blood. So the dialysis was 2 years long. It was just a part of our life, so we just incorporated it. We didn't feel hard done by. We were glad that it was keeping him alive, but it was also, it structured our lives. And sometimes his parents would offer to drive him, like on a Saturday night, and I was quite happy to accommodate that, because I was wiped too. There was a lot of sitting around, you know, taking him there, and then you sit for 4 hours and you're with a lineup of people on the machines, and sometimes it was galling to hear the other people, you know, people have complaints and gratitude on different levels. But I remember one guy who came in and said, oh, I always go on a drinking binge the night before and let the nurse figure it out the next day how much fluid to take off, which I thought, boy, you do not deserve this option when there's other people waiting for it. Anyway, when when his parents would sometimes drive him, of course they wanted this to be like a social outing and stop for coffee on the way home, and that's the last thing Randy felt like. But he's one to honor his parents, so he did that, and you know, it just extended it that much longer for that stint. So we were quite happy when we had an option to be at home, and surprised that it was cost effective. But I think, I could have it wrong, but I think they said it was about $40,000 to set up the machine and maintain it and send the supplies, etc. here in a year. Whereas if he was at the hospital with their staff and their space, etc., it was about $60,000. So expensive regardless of which way it was done. But we had one room. When we get a new shipment of supplies, it pretty much took up what was the spare room. And we had the dialysis, because Newmarket has very hard water. What usually people have one tank to purify the water and the blood, or the water. We had 3. So that's, you know, we still have that tap in there, and the idea was if it was ever needed, it's better to keep it there, but obviously hoping it would never be needed. So when you had a transplant call of a kidney available,
Don't play with them. They're making extra noise.
so I teach prenatal classes, and one night I went out and was just out and about doing errands and just shopping and stuff, and was planning to come home, but it spent too much time, so I was going to go straight from being out to going to teach prenatal, and I happened to phone home. And Randy said, oh, they called about a kidney available, but I told them I didn't know if I could go because I was babysitting. I couldn't believe that. And he said, well, phone them back quick. So that just kind of tells you how you don't really think straight when something unanticipated happens. So I came home, I did some scrambling to get someone else to cover my class, which happened fairly easily. But in hindsight, I think, why didn't I just put up a sign on the, so responsible we are, on the door, just saying, can't be here, and this is why. Anyway, we went in, and I talked to another guy waiting, and he said, oh, he'd had a transplant from his grandmother the first time. It didn't last very long, so his sister got told by the family that she was going to donate to him this time, and she was highly stressed about that. But he said it like, well, of course, that's her duty, and everybody sort of said she's the one. So I felt badly for her. And prior to Randy having a cadaveric option, his dad had said at one point, well, you can have one of mine, I've had a good life, which he obviously thought this donating a kidney was donating his life. A sister had offered, and Randy didn't want to put anybody through anything, and she told him that, well, if you get worse, then you're not going to have any choice in the matter, which of course he would have had a choice in the matter. So it was somebody's death, but somebody's kindness that offered it up, and we were told it was a young kidney, though it could be interpreted as it was a fresh kidney, newly donated, or a young person, and apparently somebody looked up deaths that day and made some surmise that it was a young person in their 20s involving a motorcycle accident. So whether that's the case, we'll never know, but if they're out there, I hope they know that Randy had 27 years with his kidney before things went the other way.